Telling your child that they have autism, how do you go about that? You are not alone. You are your child's best advocate. Today on the show, I had a delightful conversation with Rob Gorski. Rob Gorski is actually in close proximity to me, which never happens. He's also here in Northeast Ohio, which is always really fun for me. He has an amazing podcast and business called the Autism Dad. He is raising 3 sons who are autistic, and he shares with us today conversations about telling your child that they have autism and gives us helpful tips and strategies if that is something that you are dealing with or something that you're supporting parents with on that journey as well. He started a personal blog about 15 years ago, and he was not 100% that people were reading it. These were just a place for him to get his thoughts down. And it turned out to be such a source of support for so many others. He has a private community, the podcast, really a wealth of information. I'm excited for you to listen to this conversation today. And if you love this podcast, let me know. Leave a review over on Apple Podcasts, the Autism Outreach Podcast. I always love hearing from you. Let's get into our conversation today with Rob Gorski.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Welcome to the Autism Outreach Podcast. We have a great guest for you today, and somebody who's actually also an Ohioan, is pretty close to me in location, although we've never met till today. But I see you all over social media, and I think we might be Facebook friends, maybe? I don't know. But I follow you on Facebook. Yeah. So welcome to the show, Rob Gorski. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So you have an amazing business and podcast called the Autism Dad, for those that may be unfamiliar with your work. Can you tell us a little bit about that podcast and your business and what inspired you to start it?
It started about 15 years ago, actually. And I was kind of struggling to deal with my oldest's diagnosis at the time, because he was diagnosed with childhood disintegrative disorder, which is a very rare form of autism. So he experienced like massive global regression about the age of 4.5.
Oh, wow.
And so there's like the whole grieving thing where kind of grieve the loss of a child that's still there. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Because he was so profoundly different. We had to learn him all over again. And, I started to just kind of get overwhelmed eventually. And so I started to write on this little WordPress blog that I had set up. It's called Lost and Tired at the time. And I thought it was private. And I was just kind of using it as like a journaling, like dumping ground, right? Like I just put everything that I'm thinking down so that I can walk away from it and not carry it with me. And I assumed incorrectly that because I had to sign in to write, that you had to sign in to read. No idea how things worked back then.
Yeah.
And at the time, there really wasn't anything online about autism. You could find like YouTube clips and things like that of like meltdowns and Rain Man stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened was that when people would start searching for autism, they started to find, like, my blog was the first thing that would pop up. And so lots of people started to read the things that I didn't want to have in my own head,
Yes,
let alone other people read them. Right. But what I found was that it was very therapeutic. It's therapeutic for me. It was very helpful for the parents to recognize that they weren't alone and to know that they're not the only person feeling a certain way and all that kind of stuff. And, as a full-time caregiver to my 3 autistic kids, like, I did this as sort of like a passion, kind of purpose for the pain kind of thing. Like, it helped me to get through life.
Yeah.
But it reached a point where, I had to be able to, I had to make a choice between giving this up and trying to pursue something outside of the house, which is really hard to do in a situation where you have multiple kids on your own. But, or I could turn this into a business and start moving in that direction. So that's what I did. I started the podcast about 5 years ago, because we're halfway through season 7 now. And, it's become, it's been around forever. And it's just been a really positive thing for me, like personally, just because it helped me to kind of navigate all this stuff in life and And then, it's helped a lot of other people, but I mean, the on the business side of things, that's kind of what you're asking about. It's more like advertising and sponsorships and consulting and speaking and that kind of stuff. I don't put paywalls in front of parents just because I know what it was like to, know there was something that could help my kids, but not be able to afford it. So I'm very careful with that kind of stuff. But yes, I mean, it's been a very, it's been kind of an arduous journey because I'm a one person operation, but it's been worth it. It's been pretty amazing. I met a lot of neat people and made a lot of connections, and
that's cool.
Still kicking. So
right. I know sometimes they call it a solopreneur. That's, I'm in the online, I have an online business too. So, sometimes they call it a solopreneur. I mean, I have contractors and I have somebody who does this podcast and I have an assistant, but no, I know what you mean. It's, you're doing a lot, but it's nice because I know you said I've been in the field 20 plus years. So I'm a speech therapist and BCBA. And I know you said like 15 years ago, maybe you started it. Yeah. There just wasn't a lot out there. Now it's almost like you're like, wait, that's too much. And I don't know what to think about each thing. But back then there wasn't as much. So now people have like a different decision is like, which person am I going to listen to or which intervention am I going to use? And that's a whole other thing. I was looking through your podcasts though, and I still am clinically involved, 2 days a week, I'm a treating therapist, but I always try to have autistic adults on. I always try to have autistic parents on. Actually, you might be the first dad who's on sharing about the autism journey of your family. Because I think that listening to you and your family's journey helps us be better providers, like how can we know how to help and support? Everybody has a different journey. So I think it helps us grow and learn and share. But I was looking at one episode that you did really kind of resonated with me, just some experience I've had. And it was about discussing an autism diagnosis with your child. Can you kind of share? So you said you have 3 sons. They all have autism, correct? And can you share kind of what your family journey was with that, like telling somebody that they had autism?
So, this is a really kind of a weird, maybe not the best example, just because like my kids are so profoundly different. And my oldest was very different than most because childhood disintegrative disorder is almost never diagnosed. Yeah. And he's the only, I've come across one other person with that diagnosis in the last 15 or 20 years. But with him, we never really explained anything to him because there wasn't really a need for it, if that makes sense. Yeah. We would talk about things, if he'd get frustrated with himself or whatever, we'd just talk about how like, everybody's brain works differently. And, some people have sensitivities to noise or some people get frustrated easily. Like it's just whatever. And sometimes, certain brains are called autistic brains and there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's just a different way of being wired. And when I would explain, like my other 2 kids do very, very well. And most people, you would probably pick it out, but most people probably wouldn't. Yeah. But they don't recognize autism in each other, which is frustrating for a million reasons because they each do to each other what the other one does that makes them mad, right? And triggers them. But with the other 2, I would have to explain autism in the sense that this is why their older brother acted the way that he did. They didn't recognize it in themselves. And so when I would explain to them, like, I realize this is frustrating and all this stuff, but he does this because he's autistic and his brain works a little bit differently. And, he doesn't have that tolerance or that his threshold for frustration is non-existent or whatever. And I was like, honestly, like you guys have autistic brains too, and you're very different and that's okay. It's just a different way of being. And so we just kept it very matter of fact and very just matter of fact and uncomplicated. Because the more you try to reason with or over explain, the more questions that come up that you don't want to have to answer. So I figured if it's not broke, don't fix it. We have an amazing therapist who has been along for the ride for like the last 20 years. Wow. And helped to kind of guide us through those discussions. And she would have a lot of discussions. There were so many times, to be honest with you, where it'd just be like, her name is Patty. And something would come up like that, and I'd be like, you know what, guys, we see Patty on Tuesday, so let's just
Right.
put a pin in that
Yes.
until somebody who knows more about this than I do can help me to answer your question in a way that's helpful. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of how we, approached it.
I like that because I had a situation where I worked in middle school and high school up here in Cuyahoga County, really affluent district for 10 years. And I had a kid that had speech as a consult, and he was new to our district. And so his IEP was coming up. And so I wanted to, talk to him because he had an autism diagnosis. And so my inclination is, somebody in high school, and he was, in all general education classes and, that type of learner. I was like, okay, I need to go see, so-and-so, I want to just talk to him about his services and just his thoughts and, all those kind of like student-led IEP ideas. And the teacher just like stopped me, and she was like, whoa, he doesn't know that he has autism. He doesn't know that he has that diagnosis. And I was like, what? Not judging because I'm a parent of 3, but I was just like, okay. I didn't know what to do with that. And then we did subsequently, I can't remember. I think he probably just stayed on consult. We did have a meeting with his parents, and I don't remember what the rationale was for that. Maybe, I don't know what the rationale was, because I was so like, I'm more like, I like your idea of like, let's keep it out in the open and that all brains are different. And, I think with the neurodiversity movement, I think that's really, and like how you said, you had a therapist, family therapist, like mental health. We talk about these things now. It's not something that is a secret. I feel like if you don't tell your child and they find out, that I think that puts you in a bind. I think that gets complicated then.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, because I realize, I mean, there's lots of talks that I want to have with my kids over the years, but you have to, right? And
right.
When it comes to the autism thing, my thought process was like, well, I was already we were already kind of in the spotlight, right? So we were,
right,
on CNN stuff, and it was just everywhere. And so there was no way they were going to be hearing things, right? And what I didn't want to have happen was for kids in school to be the ones that point out that they're different, right?
Right.
If that makes sense. Kids are not always nice. And they went to Summit Academy, right? So I think is in your area too.
Yeah, I think I know what that is. Is it a charter school?
It's
or is that would be considered a charter school?
Autism and ADHD
okay.
And
I think I know what it is.
disabilities. And then their siblings. You have some neurotypical kids in the mix. But they were around other kids that were also autistic, but they don't know, they didn't realize that they were autistic. So they were still bold and picking on and teasing and stuff like that. And so I didn't want the first time that they heard something to be from some, stupid kid making fun of them or whatever. So I think talking about it and destigmatizing it and normalizing it from a very early age is very helpful. What I would not want to do, and again, this is just me, is hide it from my kids, because they're going to find out anyways. And I have talked to so many autistic adults who didn't find out they were autistic until they were an adult, and then come to find out like mom and dad knew about it the whole time. And that creates huge trust issues in some of these people, and understandably so. But I also understand from the parents' perspective, like they're not trying to be mean or malicious or anything like that. They do what they think is right. But I just think like if you hide something, then that gives the impression that there's something to hide, right? And if you're just open about it, but like, everybody's different. There's autistic people walking around that have no idea they're autistic. I mean, you walk past them every single day. You're not the only person out there that's doing this. And some of the most brilliant people on the planet have autistic brains. So I just really, I took the more direct, just be upfront about this, so that we were kind of in control of the dialogue, and we started that at a very early age. But we just didn't overcomplicate it.
Yeah, I love that. And I had somebody on as a guest. I know you have a lot more podcasts probably than I do, but I'm almost to episode 200. So some of the conversations blur, but I remember somebody, I had an autistic adult on, and they were like in grade school, and they were doing like a disability Jeopardy or something like that. And I don't think they knew about their autism diagnosis yet. And they were like talking about, I don't know, if it was Albert Einstein or, the teacher was trying to which is like cool, right? They're like, oh, look, this person has autism. This person has autism. And the person went home and they're like, why were we playing that game? So at that time, then they were still young enough that they then had a dialogue and things like that, which I thought was kind of, an interesting way. Yeah. So you can control the conversation. I like that. But I can imagine, it's a big undertaking, right? To have that. Like I taped a podcast yesterday for somebody who's doing some parent tutorials in our membership, and she's a BCBA, but she's raising an autistic child. And she just said, like, the evaluation process is taxing. Like her son is pretty young. So talking about that and then thinking about all of this and how to deal with it. And what's unfortunate is like when you're on social media and things like that, people always have an opinion about, and in real life too, I'm sure, have an opinion.
In social media, they're much more confident in
obviously. Yes.
throwing their opinion in your direction, even when it's almost always unsolicited. Like, yeah, it is. I just, I agree with you. I mean, I think that everybody's different, and then you got to be developmentally appropriate and all that stuff.
Right.
And I think it depends on the kid too, because I mean, if you have a kid who is doing really, really well, just maybe a little quirky or weird or whatever, I mean, maybe you have that conversation later. I mean, I don't know. Everybody's different. You got to do what you think is right. But I just, if you hide something from your kids, then it's like there's stigma or shame attached to that sometimes. And I was very concerned about that being a thing. Yeah. I was diagnosed with ADHD 2 years ago at 43, almost 44. Oh. And I was very angry about that. Like nobody knew, my parents didn't hide it from me or whatever, but like my whole life made sense after that.
Right.
And I was very upset that it took me that long to figure that out. Mm-hmm. So if somebody had known about that and didn't tell me, I would have been hurt. And because my life wouldn't have had to be that hard, or at least I would have been kinder to myself because I would understand why I struggled with certain things and whatever. But teach their own, and you got to do what's best for your kids.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually had a friend that was diagnosed later in life with ADHD, but I had somebody else on the podcast, actually from the Milestones Autism organization. Have you ever been to that conference or? Okay. Yeah.
I know. I have friends on the board there.
Oh, okay.
I'm very familiar with them. They're a great organization.
Yeah, I had, she's no longer there anymore, but she was on the podcast, and she, throughout high school, she was diagnosed with like depression, anxiety. And then I think it was like, she was like maybe Googling autism symptoms because she thought her dad had autism. And then she was like, oh, this is about me. And then she was able to get a formal diagnosis, but she's a girl. We talk about autism in girls a lot because it's misdiagnosed or not diagnosed. And then she was diagnosed with other things, which, she might still have those diagnoses. I'm not sure. But to get that diagnosis then made her feel like, okay, Carly Jalowick, that's her name. But it just gave her some sense of something to finally be like, oh, okay, this is why A, B, C, D, Yeah.
It's context.
Right.
And it's kind of like, it puts everything into focus. So like, for me, it was always depression and anxiety for me throughout my whole life, and some post-traumatic stress and stuff like that. But it was mostly those two things, and nothing really helped. Like the traditional therapy for depression and stuff didn't help. Meds didn't always help, or didn't take it down all the way.
Right.
Because it was secondary to the unmanaged ADHD. And as soon as I figured that out, and I started going down that rabbit hole, and I went through the evaluation process, which felt like it took forever. Everything started to make sense. It was like all these different pieces of this puzzle started finally, fitting in place. And it was like, holy cow. Like now my whole life makes so much more sense, because it's just that context that helps you to bring everything into focus, and you better understand it. Now depression and stuff like that is better managed because I'm treating the main cause of it. Right. So,
Yeah. Helps you know yourself better. Yeah, no, I love that.
Yeah.
So what would you share with parents who maybe have a diagnosis and maybe they want to share this with their child, but they're feeling hesitant, or maybe they have their aunt in their ear saying like, don't say anything, or, like everybody, I'm sure everybody's family is different, but I know how families are, and everybody has an opinion, whether they share it or they just kind of glare at you. But what would you say? Like, do you have a framework or any kind of steps that parents can go through, or any resources on, about, you have this podcast episode that you had done about it, but what as a parent should I be thinking, approaching that? I don't want to say it's a difficult conversation, but it is a critical conversation. I mean, it's an important conversation.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be a difficult conversation. I mean, there are to me, like having the sex talk with your kids is way more
Right.
than being like, hey,
Yeah.
you have ADHD.
Right.
One of the things that when we worked with our therapist, it was have that conversation in like a neutral environment. Don't be like, let's sit down. We need to talk, because that already like sends like that message, like, oh my God, I'm in trouble or something bad's going to happen. So like,
Yeah.
we did talk to the kids about it. It was like we went to Dairy Queen or something like that. And we're having ice cream and just kind of like slipped it into the conversation a little bit. And then, and just allowed them to just like little pieces at a time. And, my youngest is one of those kids who like just thrives on knowledge. And so you have to be very careful what you tell him, because it just leads to him wanting to know more and more and more, whether he's ready for it or not, or I'm ready for it or not.
Yeah, right.
But it is, it is a conversation I think that we should have. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, you are the one who knows what's best for your kids more than anybody else, right? You're your child's advocate. You know them better than anybody else on this planet. And you have to do what you think is right. You have to drown out all the noise and set up boundaries and just tell people like, look, this is the way it is. You don't like it. That's too bad, because you don't get a vote. Right. And it's not to be like snide about it, but I mean, we chew up so much bandwidth just trying to deal with the people in our lives who won't let things be. Right. Like, it's tough. It's tough to do that. And so when you learn to set up those boundaries and just say, look, we're going to have this conversation when we're ready to have it. I don't want you saying anything to them because it's not appropriate. And you do what you feel is best for your kid. I mean, is it going to be the right thing? I don't know. Maybe it won't be, right? And you can learn from it, but none of us have instruction books. All of us are human and we're making tons of mistakes, but we learn from it. Yeah. And I just think that, we put so much pressure on ourselves to always say and do the right thing. And everybody else out there, who might be suggesting things like we were talking about,
right?
They're not walking in your shoes. Right. If it was something that was that simple to do, you would have already done it, right? There's so many pieces and parts to this that as parents or even professionals who are dealing with this stuff and know kind of that kind of more intimate look into what life is like, it's not that cut and dry.
Right.
A lot of stuff that I did with my kids never made sense to other people because they didn't understand the complexity of stuff. So like talk to your kid when you think it's the right time for them. If ultimately it proves to be a mistake at some point down the road, you did the right thing in the moment and you made the best decision you could. They're not, it's not going to be life altering in a negative way. You just what you feel is right. Don't let other people make you question yourself or doubt yourself as a parent or whatever. And just, set up boundaries where you need to keep that noise to a minimum, because it really does. It saps that limited bandwidth that we have to get through every day. And then you end up spending it on people and it's not where it needs to be spent, So I don't know if that answers the question.
It does. I like that. But I think in general, a lot of people can resonate with that. We worry about what other people think for, reasons we shouldn't. We should be focusing on the task at hand. One other question before I let you go, because you've been on CNN and I was on New Day Cleveland the other day. I just thought like,
congratulations.
Next up, Today Show. I don't know.
There you go. Nice.
I'm in a dream world, Rob. I'm in a dream world. But so, there's so much information now about autism. There's just so much with podcasts and trainings and social media. I talked, I think I posted it today on Instagram actually about parent shaming, where a parent, because I'm a BCBA, so not everybody likes applied behavior analysis, but a parent will ask a question about maybe ABA or PECs or something. And then, they really get a lot of I call it parent shaming. Yeah, they get blasted with all this negativity. And I'm more middle of the road. Like if you use floor time or you use whatever, like it's not maybe what I'm going to do, but I understand that that's what you think is best, and that's fine. I don't think we have to have this one track thing. But what do you recommend for parents or having that kind of information overload? Because it can be daunting, don't you think, with everything that's out there now?
Yeah. Well, and Facebook and like social media can be amazing, right? You connect with other parents, whatever, but it's sometimes the worst place to be.
Yes.
Because it's so polarizing and they're echo chambers, right? So I know what you're talking about with BCBAs or ABA, because if you even breathe that or you even entertain a question, right, and it's like this bad signal goes up and you get swarmed by all these people who just start telling you you're a horrible person.
Right.
I've had death threats for entertaining that conversation in forums. I mean, like it's bad. I just stopped caring. Like, I don't care what other people think anymore. And it took a long time to get there.
Yeah.
And it is, not that I'm challenging anybody to do this, but it's very tough to get under my skin anymore. Because it just, there's so much information out there. And I think the best bet is to find yourself in a situation where you are learning from people who are not telling you what to do. When they tell you what to do, that's a red flag for me, because everybody's kid is different. And I don't know. Like, I hate giving people direct advice. It's like, look, this is what I do for my family.
Right.
Everybody's different. I would always talk to a therapist. I would always involve a professional, but find people who are open to discussion, who are not just repeating what other people are doing, and things that are backed by science and medicine and fact and reality, because so much of this stuff is disinformation. A lot of the current ABA controversy, right? Like, in modern times, it's all disinformation. I mean, there was a lot of bad stuff that happened 20, 30 years ago, but it's different now. Right. And it's just echo chambers of people repeating what they heard. So it can be very dangerous. So, I'm a big fan of the Autism Society. Milestones is a great resource. There's a lot of reputable places that you can go to find information. And even if it just points you in the right direction. I try to bring as many different people and parents and autistic adults and all that stuff on the podcast, because I think it's important that we hear from everybody's perspective. But it always has to deal in reality, right? It's a difference between opinion and in fact. We're all allowed to have opinions, but there's facts are facts, right? We don't dispute those. And if we can keep that as kind of your that goalpost and just kind of walk that line, then everything else that people are telling you, their opinions, whatever, can help you to make decisions and help you put context around things. But, don't believe everything that you find on social media, because it's not going to lead you in a good place all the time. And just find people who are, reputable and who don't, like, again, just don't tell you what to do. And autistic adults. There are so many autistic adults who are fantastic resources. Some of them aren't. Some of them are very unpleasant, just like with anybody else. So, you can have bad experiences with anybody, but there's a lot of people that I've met in the autism community that have helped me to better understand my own kids, and people are an amazing resource. And there's, a lot of the autistic adults out there want to help. They want you to better understand so that you can help your kid. They want to see, you not make the same mistakes maybe their parents made. And you just have to ask, and you have to be open to listening and learning. And so
I love that. That's a great answer. And I like the idea of learning from people who are not telling you what to do, just people who are, positive. Who are positive too. I think that's always, there can be a lot of negativity online. So kind of seeking out that corner of the internet, because it can be a great resource, right? That's how I connected with you and probably every guest I've had on today. So yeah, there's a lot of good there. So this is such a great conversation, not something that we've ever covered on the podcast. So I'm excited that we've kind of talked about this very important subject. Where can people find out more about you and your work, Rob?
Sure. The easiest thing to do is just go to the autismdad.com. I'm rebuilding the site, but it links you to everything. So you can get the podcast and social media, and I have a free parent support group and stuff like that. So there's, if you do join a support group, just please answer the questions, because if you don't answer the questions, we don't let you in.
Right.
We're trying to keep a safe space for people. So
yes,
to turn so many people away because they don't follow directions. Yeah. Everything is at the autismdad.com.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great to connect.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.